There is something within me I have never fully understood. It has no shape, no name. Yet strangely, it is the very thing that shapes every encounter, every glance I have ever shared, every silence between the words left unspoken. All I know is this. There is something in me that makes the world sound different, as if I am always hearing a frequency others ignore. Some people call it an aura, a rare energy field, but to me, it was never a gift. It was a scar, a wound that turned into perception. People often think sensitivity is a gift of the heart, that the more you can listen, the kinder you must be. But the truth is, before I became someone who could listen, I was a child who had to survive. I didn't choose to feel other people's emotions. I learned it because silence could be deadly. I read the pauses in voices. I guessed when anger was about to erupt. I learned to tell when a compliment was real and when an eye was lying. None of it began because I wanted to understand someone. It began because I needed to make it through the day. Some people grow up in love and learn to trust the world, but I learned to watch it. I studied every tiny detail, crossed arms, shifting breath, the rhythm of a fake smile. That's when I realized my own feelings didn't matter anymore. What mattered was, what are they feeling? What will they do? Who do I need to become so they don't get angry? Survival became skill. Skill became destiny. As I got older, people said I had a strong intuition. They praised me for being insightful, perceptive, kind. But they didn't know that every time I entered a room, it felt like walking through hundreds of invisible emotions. I sensed sadness before it showed. I felt the weight behind forced laughter. I noticed the rage hiding in calm eyes. It all came at once, without warning. I smiled, but inside, I was exhausted. I used to think I was born this way, someone with a special gift. But later I realized it wasn't a gift. It was a scar, passed down from the years I had to save myself. My sensitivity wasn't a divine light. It was the light of a wound that learned how to see in the dark. Some say aura comes from peace. But for people like me, aura comes from impact, from being hurt so deeply the soul cracks, just enough for light to escape. I carry the wound that has become vision. Maybe that's why I feel the world through my skin, not just my eyes or ears, but through layers of emotion that can't be named. When I read about Chiron, the ancient symbol of the wounded healer, I saw myself. He could feel the pain of every living thing, but never heal his own. Just like me, just like you maybe, the ones who listen so deeply, we forget our own voice. I used to wonder why I was drawn to broken souls, why I always heard the cry behind the smile, why I wanted to rescue others from their darkness. Maybe because, deep down, I was still trying to rescue the child inside me, the one sitting in a silent room, listening to the heavy breath of an adult, trying to guess if today would be safe. The aura others sense around me, this rare light they admire. It isn't just energy. It is the story pain became. It is the ability to feel every shade of fear, because I have lived inside them. It is light, yes, but also an alarm system, a gift, and a burden. Most people live wrapped in an invisible armor. They don't hear the cold wind in an empty room. They don't notice the fleeting sadness in someone's eyes. But for me, everything is loud. Every space I enter feels like a sea of waves. I see who's hurting, who's hiding, who's searching for shelter, and I don't always want to know. Some nights, I wish I could turn off this invisible radar, just to feel silence for real. But then again, it's the very thing that has kept me alive. Maybe that's why people like me are called the ones who feel for the rest of the world. A friend once told me, when you walk into a room, the atmosphere changes. I smiled. They didn't know that this shift in energy is the result of years spent learning how to read the air just to survive. And now I understand. The light people see in me comes from the deepest parts of my darkness, from the places where I once fell, from the nights so quiet I could hear the fear inside my heartbeat. That light isn't peace. It is courage. The courage to stay open after being hurt. The courage to still feel after feeling too much. And so I ask myself, if my aura is born from every crack and fracture, can I ever live without reading people all the time? Can I just exist like a normal person? Maybe not. Because once you've seen the world through the eyes of an empath, you can't go back. You've stepped into the depths of the human soul, where every pain echoes and every joy feels fragile. But maybe, in that very depth, you begin to see something truly beautiful. The truth that all emotions, whether painful or tender, are just ripples from the same ocean. And if you listen closely, that ocean starts to speak in its own language. When I realized that, something shifted in me. I no longer saw my aura as a burden. I saw it as an ancient river flowing through my soul, carrying the memory of thousands who once felt, loved, and feared. And I am just the vessel, delicate but strong, learning how to hold the water without letting it overflow. Because maybe only when we realize that our light is born from darkness, we begin to walk without fear. And then, in the quiet understanding of that truth, my soul exhales, as if, after everything, it is ready to tell the next story about the price of sensitivity. When that light began to spread, I realized it didn't just shine outward, it also pulled inward. People often think of light as something that radiates. But for an empath, light is an open door, and once opened, anything can come in. I began to feel this more clearly in moments that seemed ordinary. A stranger sitting next to me on a train, a coworker sharing their life story just minutes after we met. I didn't understand why they poured their hearts out. I only knew that the way they looked at me felt like they had met someone who could hear even the words they hadn't said. And they talked and talked. At first, I saw it as trust something beautiful. But over time, I grew tired. I realized some people came to me not for who I was, but because of the emptiness inside them that needed to be filled. They reached for my light to feel warmth. But little by little, they took from it until I was left with nothing but exhaustion. And worse than that, I blamed myself for feeling tired. I thought I was selfish. I believed that if I were truly good, I wouldn't feel pain when helping others. But that was an illusion, one that many empaths carry in their hearts for a lifetime. The world sees empaths as people with healing energy, but no one tells you that gift can slowly destroy you. When you open your heart too wide, every emotion, every pain, every wave of energy from others flows into you like a never-ending stream. You become a bottomless well, and no one notices that a well also needs to be filled. I remember one quiet evening when I felt like even the air around me was heavy. I didn't know whose emotion it was. Maybe a neighbor in an argument. Maybe a friend I hadn't spoken to yet who was hurting. Or maybe no one at all. Just the echo of the collective unconscious passing through. Whatever it was, I felt it. A nameless sadness floating in the space around me. And I, unknowingly, became the one to breathe it in. That was when I understood aura isn't just something others sense from you. It's something that lets you sense what others don't want seen. A person with a strong aura is like a clear piece of glass. They reflect everything, the beauty and the pain, the light and the shadow. And if they don't know how to keep a distance, they risk being consumed by those reflections. The storyteller in me slowed down, voice soft like breath. I thought of the alchemist's flask, the container strong enough to hold both fire and poison, to withstand the heat of transformation. An empath is the same. They are the vessel that holds the emotions of the world. But if the vessel cracks, everything spills out. Kindness turns to fatigue. Love turns to resentment. Understanding becomes deep loneliness. There was a time I asked myself, am I really living or just existing inside someone else's story? I had become so used to feeling that I no longer knew which emotions were truly mine. That's the scariest moment, when you can't tell where you end and they begin. Empaths are often drawn to unhealed souls. They hear silent calls, feel the pain others haven't yet named, and they reach out, open, giving. But there's an unspoken law of the universe. Those who aren't ready to heal will unknowingly drain your light until they feel better and walk away, leaving you in your own darkness. When I understood this, I became afraid of my own kindness, afraid of my light, afraid of the emptiness that came after saving someone. I remember sitting alone in my room, feeling as though the whole world was crying through my chest. And when the tears fell, I didn't even know who I was crying for anymore. But then, in the middle of that fear, a new awareness began to rise. True light doesn't mean giving endlessly. It means keeping enough to still exist. We cannot light the world with a flame that has run out of fuel. I began to see that empathy is a double-edged energy. It is both light and blade. If you use it with awareness, it guides you. But if you use it unconsciously, it cuts deep into your own soul. Many people like me have worn their empathy like shackles chained to the pain of others. Maybe you've been there too, loving someone so much that you hurt for them, worried for them, lived their life, and forgot your own. Maybe you once thought, if I love enough, they will change. But love is not disappearance. Love is conscious presence. When I realized that, I began to observe myself. Every time I felt drained, I asked, is this emotion really mine? Sometimes, just asking that question brought some of my energy back. I understood that not everyone who comes to your light deserves to stay in it. Some souls need their own darkness to grow, and if you try to pull them out too soon, you steal the lesson life is giving them. Just like in dreams, when you're being chased, the monster isn't something outside. It's your own shadow longing to be seen. And when you turn around and look it in the eye, the fear disappears. I began to see other people's pain as symbols, messages from the unconscious, not cries for rescue. When someone shared their suffering, I no longer rushed in to heal. I listened. I let them touch their own wound. I was no longer the one who carried, but the one who reflected. Strangely, the more I let go of the need to save others, the clearer my aura became. I felt a lightness in every breath, as if, for the first time in my life, the light inside me didn't need to hold anyone up. It could just stand still and shine. That was the moment I understood. The energy of an empath is like a river. When it flows naturally, it is clear and cool. But when forced into a waterfall, it will break. And to keep that water from becoming muddy, we need one thing: boundaries. I began to see boundaries not as walls of selfishness, but as the banks that keep the river from flooding. Only with edges can water reach the sea. Only with limits can kindness last. And in the moment I began to rebuild the banks around my own flow, something inside me quietly shifted, as if my soul was preparing to open a new door, where darkness is no longer the enemy, but the guide that makes the light easier to see. For a long time, I thought I fully understood my own light. I knew when to step back, when to stay silent, when to pull my energy away from those who drained me. But still, there were nights when a heavy, invisible weight crept in. It didn't come from anyone. It was just darkness, soft as mist, yet it reached into every breath. I thought I had escaped it, but no, it was still there, patiently waiting, like an old friend with something left to say. I began to realize that no matter how far we go on the journey of healing, there is always a part of us longing to be seen, the part we buried deep down, the part we named darkness. And strangely enough, it is often this very part that holds the missing pieces of our soul. I remember that morning, when fragile sunlight spilled through the window. I made coffee, watched the steam rise, and in that stillness, I heard something unusual myself. Not the voice of logic, but a weak, trembling voice, old and familiar, like a child within me whispering, "I'm tired." I had run from that voice for so long. Every time it spoke, I covered it up by helping others. I gave, I cared, I comforted, I listened, so I wouldn't have to listen to myself. But that morning, I didn't run. I let the child speak. It told me it had been lonely for years, had learned to smile to hide fear, had sacrificed itself just to be loved. All it wanted was for me to stop, to hold it once, and to admit, I'm fragile too. I need saving too. I went quiet. A tear fell into my coffee and melted into the bitter scent. And in that moment, I knew this was the true darkness I needed to face. Not the sadness of others, but the part of myself I had forgotten. Darkness is not the enemy. It's a map. It points us to where we are lost. It speaks in the language of fear, of anger, of shame. But if we're willing to listen, it is simply inviting us home. I began to practice this. When anger showed up, I didn't try to chase it away. I asked what it wanted to say. When I felt jealousy or hurt, I looked closely at it, as if speaking to an old friend. And strangely, the more I looked, the more I saw that inside every shadow was a quiet cry for love, the kind of love that doesn't need to be earned. On this journey, I learned that shadow work isn't about digging up guilt. It's about learning to love the parts of ourselves we once rejected. When we dare to look at the scariest places, we find the most sacred truth, the truth of who we are. I thought of all the empaths like me, the gentle ones, the understanding ones, the ones who always listen. And I realized that behind that gentleness often hides a rage that was never allowed to breathe, a longing to be free, a need to say no without guilt, a voice buried under years of being nice. If you're hearing these words, maybe you feel it too. Maybe you're also carrying the weight of kindness. Maybe you're tired of always being the comforter, tired of always understanding, tired that no one understands you. And if something in these words touches you, maybe it's not by chance. Maybe the deepest part of you is nodding, softly saying, "Yes, I get it." If you see yourself in this story, take a moment, breathe deeply, place your hand on your heart. Let it know it's not alone. Leave a small sign, a comment, a whisper, a breath, so I know you're still here, walking this path with me. Because sometimes, just knowing someone else is walking through their own darkness makes us feel a little less alone. When I began to accept my own darkness, everything changed. I no longer felt the need to save everyone. I realized healing isn't an action, it's a presence. You can't bring light to others if you haven't learned to sit in your own dark. True light arrives, not when you try to shine, but when you simply allow yourself to be like a candle in a quiet room, soft and steady, just enough to show someone the way. One night, I dreamed I was lost in a forest. Everything was pitch black, but I heard whispers all around, voices. I couldn't tell if they were people or the wind, saying, "Don't be afraid." I kept walking, and in that darkness, I saw eyes watching me, not with threat, but as if they were guiding me. When I sat down and closed my eyes, I understood that the dark forest was my soul, and those eyes were the parts of my shadow waiting to be seen. When I opened my heart, they dissolved into light. From that dream, I understood something that words can't quite explain. Light doesn't destroy darkness. It remembers they were always one. When we stop fighting, the two come together and form peace. I started living differently. When someone was angry, I didn't feel fear. When someone was hurting, I didn't rush to fix them. I looked at them the way I had looked at myself in the forest, without judgment, without fear. I gave them space for their darkness to breathe. And something magical happened when you stop trying to fix someone. They begin to change on their own. In one sunset evening, when light and darkness touched, I felt myself being reborn. My aura was no longer just a soft mist surrounding me. It became a living field breathing with me. It wasn't just light. It was the balance between light and dark, between giving and keeping, between understanding others and understanding myself. And in that moment, I realized something even deeper. It's not light that teaches us how to see. It's darkness. Because only when everything around us falls into night do we finally recognize the fire that is truly ours. Since then, I stopped trying to run from the dark. I let it walk beside me, like a quiet companion. And whenever fear returns, I remember it's okay. This fear is just a part of me asking to be seen. And when I exhale, the light within me gently expands. Maybe this is what healing really means, not banishing the darkness, but walking with it until the two become one. And when I learned this, my soul began to fall into a strange stillness, as if it had found a new path. A path that led me to a deeper truth. That only when we reach the very depths of our own darkness can we begin to recognize the true shape of ourselves and of love. Since I began learning to face my own darkness, I discovered something small, yet completely transformative. Most of the pain I carry isn't mine. It's an echo, a resonance of the collective unconscious, passed down through generations, touching me only because I opened my heart to listen. I lived like a mirror without a frame, reflecting everything that passed by. And at some point, I forgot what my own reflection looked like. There were days when I woke up with a heavy feeling, as if I were carrying an unnamed weight on my shoulders. I'd look out the window, see a clear blue sky, nothing sad at all, yet my heart would be full of gray clouds. It wasn't until I spoke with a friend that I learned they had just lost their father. That's when I understood emotions don't need words to travel. They move through the air, through a glance, through silence. And I, like every empath, was an open vessel. But an open vessel eventually cracks. I began to learn the most important lesson. Empathy only truly heals when it is paired with awareness. When you know you're feeling, instead of being swallowed by the feeling. When you can look at pain and say, "I see you, but you are not me." That's a boundary as thin as breath. But it's the line between unconscious empathy and conscious empathy. One is drowned by others' emotions. The other knows how to swim in the waters without losing their way. I still remember the day I realized this. I walked into a meeting, and within minutes, my heart was racing, my breath shallow, like someone was overwhelmed with anxiety. In the past, I would have let that feeling take over, tried to ease the room, smiled more, said things to make others feel at ease. But this time, I placed my hand on my chest and asked, "Is this feeling really mine?" The moment that question arose, my heartbeat softened. I realized the anxious energy didn't belong to me, but to the person across the table. In that single moment, I understood. Awareness is the key that frees those who feel deeply. When we stay conscious in our emotions, they no longer become waves that pull us under. They become currents that gently carry us forward. From that day on, I stopped trying to avoid the emotions of others. I learned to let them pass through. When someone was in pain, I no longer absorbed it. I stood beside them like someone holding a lantern. I let the light reach them, but I didn't let it extinguish my own flame. I realized that helping doesn't mean carrying someone else's load. It means creating space for them to see themselves. The more I lived this way, the more I understood that true compassion isn't about saving someone. It's about respecting their journey. Because sometimes it's only when we step back that they begin to walk. And sometimes the greatest love is not holding on, but stepping aside so their light can shine on its own. I remember Jung once said, "Empathy is not a wound to suffer, but a wisdom to embody." I understood that not with my mind, but through lived experience. Because every wound can become wisdom, if we stay with it long enough to hear what it wants to teach. I began to realize that I don't need to react to every emotion that passes through. I can observe without dissolving. I can love without losing myself. Just like light doesn't need to touch everything to illuminate it, only needs to be present. One afternoon, I sat in a small cafe, watching strangers pass by. A mother calming her child, a man lost in thought by the window, a girl quietly crying in the corner. All these emotions were like soft waves brushing against me. I felt every beat, but this time, there was no tiredness pulling me down. I just sat there, like someone watching the sea. Everything was still moving, but I was no longer sinking. I had become the shore. And in that stillness, I realized empathy, when joined with awareness, becomes transparency. You see, you feel, you understand, but you are no longer entangled. You don't need to do anything to prove your goodness. You simply need to be present, and that presence alone becomes healing. The awakening of an empath doesn't come in grand moments. It comes in small pauses, a breath, a glance, a silent question in the heart. Each of those moments opens a new space within the soul, a space where you are no longer pulled by others' emotions, but stand steady among all the energies crossing paths. It feels strange, as if you're walking into the same world, but everything has changed. The noise is still there, but it no longer wounds you. The sadness still exists, but it's no longer a whirlpool pulling you under. You become the one who stands in between light and darkness, between giving and keeping, between understanding others and understanding yourself. And then you realize the journey isn't over, because within that silence, another voice begins to rise, the voice of symbols, of the unconscious language that still speaks to you, through dreams, through images, through fleeting emotions, without a clear source. This is the deeper layer of empathy. Not just sensing people, but sensing the whole. One night, I dreamed I was walking down a misty path, surrounded by unnamed forests. From the trees emerged glowing creatures of strange colors, a snake winding through the grass, a deer watching me gently, an owl soaring past, its eyes shining like stars. When I woke, I knew these weren't just dreams. They were the language of the unconscious, the archetypes speaking, guiding me deeper into the journey of the soul. And I understood. If darkness is the guide, then symbols are the torches. They light up the places reason cannot reach, the places where empathy is no longer a feeling, but a conversation between soul and soul. When we've learned how to stand steady in our own emotions, the world begins to speak through the voice of dreams, of images, of intuition. Every small thing, a glance, a sound, a dream becomes a message. And the empath, if still enough, can hear that language. At this threshold, a new journey begins, a path into ancient symbols, spirit animals, Jungian images, where every dream is not just a dream, but a message from the soul. And so I continue walking from light, through darkness, into the mystical world of the unconscious, where every emotion becomes a symbol and every wound begins to tell its story in a language beyond words. When I began to understand that the world does not only speak in words, everything around me seemed to change. Every dream, every birdsong, every passing glance became a subtle message, as if the unconscious was whispering something meant only for me. I realized that emotions are not the soul's only language. Symbols are how the soul truly speaks, and the empath, if quiet enough, can hear that language. One night, I dreamed I was walking through a crowded market. In my hands was a clear bowl of water. Every person I met smiled and dipped their hand into the bowl. One person, then another, then dozens more. The water slowly drained away, and by the end of the path, all that remained was an empty, dry bottom. I felt sadness, though I didn't know why. When I woke, I wrote the dream down, and after days of reflection, I understood it was the life of the unconscious empath, a life of giving until empty, of kindness without boundaries. But the dream didn't end there. In the far corner of the market, there was a small stream flowing endlessly. It didn't shine, wasn't magical. It was simply water, cool, clear, still. When I leaned over, it reflected my face, no longer tired, but peaceful, calm, and clear. Looking back on that detail, I knew the stream was the self, the central part of the soul that Jung spoke of. That stream always exists, never runs dry, but we forget how to return to it. An empath cannot survive if they let others keep draining their bowl. They must learn to drink from the inner source, not from thank yous, recognition, or eyes begging to be saved. I began to practice this. Every time I felt exhausted, I stopped. I sat in silence and imagined myself walking to that stream. I didn't ask for anything. I simply bowed down and looked at my reflection in the water. That was enough. Every time, I felt myself returning, as if just remembering, the stream would start to flow again. From then on, I began noticing other symbolic images in my dreams, creatures, scenes, signs that seemed random, and I realized they were never meaningless. They were messages from the unconscious, guiding me toward deeper understanding of myself. One night, I dreamed of a snake coiled gently around my wrist. It didn't scare me. It didn't strike. It was just there, like a cold but gentle bracelet. In the morning, I understood the snake is an ancient symbol of transformation. It sheds its skin, leaving behind the old to be reborn. Maybe the unconscious was telling me, don't fear change. The pain you're feeling is your old skin breaking, so the new can emerge. Then came another dream. A deer wandered into my yard. It looked at me with large, gentle, trembling eyes. I moved toward it, but with one wrong step, it turned and fled. I woke with an ache in my heart. Reflecting on it, I knew the deer was the soft and vulnerable part of me, the one I often hide for fear of being seen as weak. It came to remind me that gentleness must be protected, not exposed. Another night, I dreamed of an owl perched silently on a branch, staring at me. Its eyes were bright, deep, knowing as if it saw all the things I hadn't spoken. In the dream, I felt completely seen, but not afraid. I knew the owl was a symbol of wisdom in darkness, the ability to perceive what is hidden, to sense what others cannot. It's a gift, but also a responsibility. These dreams came and went, but each time I woke, I felt like I had shed another layer of old skin, another shell I no longer needed. I stopped seeing myself as a victim of sensitivity and began to see myself as someone learning the ancient language of the soul. I started to understand our inner world is never silent. It speaks through images, symbols, sensations. When we listen, it teaches us how to live. When we ignore it, it finds other ways to reach us, sometimes through pain, sometimes through burnout, sometimes through people who reflect what we haven't yet seen. An empath has a rare gift, not only the ability to sense others, but to feel the movements of the collective unconscious. That's why we tire easily, lose our way, or get pulled into emotions that don't belong to us. But if we learn to read the language of symbols, we no longer fear. We begin to understand that every sadness, every dream, every strange coincidence carries within it a message from the deepest part of the world. One night, I sat at my desk, Soft light around me, silence in the air. I thought of the dream about the stream, and suddenly felt something clear, as if that stream wasn't just in my imagination, but truly flowing within me. That water was life. It was the self, the source, that never runs dry. I realized that when I stop thirsting for outside light, I can always hear that stream. That awareness brought me to tears. Not tears of exhaustion, but of realization I no longer needed to chase the light out there, because it had always been inside. When I began to live from that place, everything changed. The people who once drained me slowly faded away. The relationships that confused me became clear. I no longer needed to protect my energy by shutting down. I just needed to stay connected to the stream within. When the water flows, the aura shines naturally. I realized that maybe this is the true meaning of spiritual protection, not building walls, but maintaining the flow between myself and my inner source. But like every path, when your light becomes clearer, the darkness begins to test you in new ways. Because when your energy shifts, the world around you responds. And I began to sense something new. People who once came for warmth returned again, but this time bringing shadows of their own, deeper and more subtle. That's when I understood. The empath's journey is not only about learning to give or to hold back. It is about learning to stand steady among souls seeking their own light, not saving, not running, just being. From that space, a new chapter begins where kindness faces its greatest challenge: how to stay open without being consumed, how to love without losing oneself, how to remain a light among so many reaching hands in the night. And perhaps, at this threshold, my soul begins to shift into a new shape, the shape of an emotional alchemist, where pain is no longer a wound, but becomes the raw material for transformation. One night, I sat alone in my room, just a faint candle flickering in the soft ticking of a clock. On the table was a journal filled with dreams, images, and emotions I couldn't quite name. As I stared into the candlelight, a simple yet profound truth came to me. Light doesn't exist to chase away the dark. It simply exists, and through its presence, darkness takes on form. Maybe we're the same. We can't erase pain, only illuminate it with awareness. That was when I understood why people call souls like ours emotional alchemists. We are not here to avoid pain, but to turn it into gold. We were not made to carry perfect energy, but to go through the fire, to learn how to stand steady within the flames. Empathy, when untrained, is a fire without control. It burns us from the inside. But once awakened, that fire becomes a tool for transformation. Suffering into understanding, wounds into wisdom, fragility into compassionate strength. I began to look at my life as a spiritual laboratory. Every person who had hurt me, every sorrow I once thought I couldn't survive, became material. Just as raw metal needs fire to become gold, the soul needs pain to become clear. I remember Jung once said the process of individuation is the merging of consciousness and the unconscious, of light and dark, of the human and the divine within us. And empaths, more than anyone, must learn that, because without integration, we remain mirrors of others' pain, never seeing ourselves. In a dream, I saw myself standing between two mountains. One burned red with fire, the other glistened white with ice. I couldn't choose. Either path frightened me, but then I noticed a narrow trail between them, covered in mist. I walked toward it. When I woke, I knew that was the path of the conscious empath, the middle way, where heat and cold meet, where love walks hand in hand with boundaries. I realized that in every wound, a fire rises, inviting us to look inward. When someone hurts us, the soul doesn't only cry, "Why did they do this?" It also whispers, "What am I meant to learn from this?" That question doesn't come from fear, but from courage, the courage to step into our own furnace. And so, I began to refine. Every time I felt anger, I didn't push it away. I sat with it, let it speak all it wanted to say. Behind the anger was pain. Behind the pain was fear. And behind the fear was a longing to be loved. When I saw that, the fire no longer burned me. It became light. I learned how to call back the parts of my energy I had lost, pieces left behind in relationships, in conversations where I tried too hard to be understood. I would close my eyes, imagine those fragments as little lights returning, flying through the night sky, coming home to me like birds to a nest. As they returned, I felt myself expand not because I gained something new, but because I had become whole again. Wholeness is not perfection. It is peace within imperfection. It is knowing I can still feel deeply without drowning, that I can love without disappearing, that I can listen without losing my own voice. I began to understand, every time we stay calm in the fire, alchemy is happening. In that moment, we're transforming energy. No longer the one swept away by emotion. We become the observer, the one who knows emotions are waves, and we are the ocean. But this alchemy is not easy. Every soul pays for it in solitude. Because not everyone understands the silence of an empath. Not everyone sees the process unfolding inside, where each drop of emotion is being distilled into awareness. Each wound melted down into wisdom. Once, a friend told me I had changed, that I wasn't as warm as before. I just smiled, because they didn't know my quiet was not coldness. It was an inner radiance. I no longer needed to shine to prove anything. I only needed to burn the right way, at the right rhythm, for long enough. The deeper I went into this journey, the more I realized empathy is no longer just a feeling. It's an art. The art of balance between sensing and letting go, between understanding others and staying true to yourself. At times, I saw empathy as water. Without form, it spills everywhere, sweeping up everything in its path. But in a strong enough vessel, it becomes clear, directed, and healing. That vessel is awareness, shaped in the fires of our own darkness. And I know no flame burns forever without care. The light within us is the same. It needs space, stillness, and the wisdom to know when to rest. I learned to pause, not out of weakness, but to honor the fire I carry. When I stopped, I could see more clearly empathy was no longer what drained me. It became the rhythm of life itself, a current flowing through me, not clinging to me. I no longer needed to be the healer. I became the space keeper, the quiet one who watches as others' flames rise on their own. One afternoon, I sat by the sea. The waves whispered. The sky turned gold. I felt like a candle in the wind, not flashy, not loud, but steady. That light didn't need to fight the dark, because it understood they belonged to each other. I smiled. Perhaps this is what every emotional alchemist finally comes to know. We don't need to heal the world. We only need to keep our own flame from going out. And when we learn to do that, something magical happens. Others don't just see the light, they feel the peace radiating from it. Because true light is never loud. It simply exists. In that moment, I no longer felt like an empath or a healer. I was simply someone living in rhythm with their soul, knowing when to give, when to hold, when to burn, and when to rest. And from that simplicity, something deep within me began to shift, as if the soul was preparing for its final step, the return to wholeness, where light and dark are no longer opposites, but one breathing being. There are nights I wake in the middle of a dream, not because of sound, but because of a feeling as if my soul had just touched something older than time. In the dream, I see a lighthouse standing alone in the dark sea. Waves crash, winds howl, small boats drift in chaos. Yet the lighthouse does not move. It doesn't rush to rescue, doesn't call out, doesn't strain to shine brighter than it can. It simply stands, steady, casting its light in even circles. And the boats, if they truly wish to be saved, will find their way. When I wake, I still feel that light within me, and I understand that is the image of the awakened empath. The light is no longer a reaction, but a presence. You don't need to enter someone else's storm. You just need to keep your own flame alive. From where you stand, they will see the path. The world will always have storms. There will always be people who come carrying chaos, unconsciously seeking shelter in your energy. They are not bad. They are simply lost. But you no longer have to be the shelter for everyone. Because light does not save, it simply reminds others that they too can shine. I used to think love meant opening the door wide, welcoming every soul that passed by. Now I know true love is knowing when to close the door, so the light inside doesn't burn out. Knowing how to say no, not from fear, but from deep compassion for yourself and for the other person. Because you understand that if they never learn to light their own torch, your flame won't help them for long. This is the final lesson of compassion. To love without saving, to feel without dissolving. When I started living this way, my aura began to change. I didn't see it with my eyes, but I could feel it clearer, lighter, no longer clinging to others. Like a lake after a storm, no longer murky, just a mirror reflecting the sky. And when the water is calm, everything around it calms too. People came near me, and they didn't see a healer. They felt stillness, a space where they could breathe. I realized this is the deeper purpose of the empath, not to carry the weight of the world, but to become a mirror in which the world sees itself. Once, someone said to me, "When I'm near you, I feel peaceful. Not because of what you say, but because you don't try." I smiled. That was the very thing I had been searching for all along: effortless presence. Because I used to think kindness was an action, helping, comforting, offering advice. Now I know the deepest kindness is simply staying still, so others have the space to see themselves. When I learned this, I began to love the world again, not because it was beautiful, but because I no longer needed it to change for me to feel at peace. I saw people with a compassion that wasn't soaked in emotion, but clear and quiet, like light passing through water. I didn't need to understand everything, because I had understood the one thing that mattered. Every soul is on its own path back to its own light. I saw it in the woman who always smiled, though her eyes were tired, in the man who always got angry, though he was really just afraid of being left behind, in the children carrying dreams too big for their age, and in the elders still holding regrets. Each person was a story, a soul searching for wholeness. And when I saw them that way, I didn't hurt anymore. Just understood. I realized that the empath's journey was never one of suffering. It was always a journey of returning. We go through the light, through the dark, through exhaustion and rebirth, only to discover that everything was guiding us home to ourselves. We thought we were here to save the world, but truly, we were just trying to find the part of our soul that had been lost. And when that part is found, the world outside changes too, not because the world is different, but because we see it differently. In that stillness, I began to see beauty in the smallest things: sunlight slipping through curtains, the wind brushing the roof, the scent of morning coffee. The ordinary became sacred, because I was seeing with the eyes of someone who no longer needed anything more. I had stopped searching. I had come home. And in that home, the home within, I saw every part of myself gathering together: the frightened child, the exhausted adult, the healer, the wounded one, the quiet one, the strong one, all sitting side by side. No one needed to be cast out. No one had to prove anything. There was only presence, only love. I knew this was the union the journey had led me to, where light and dark are no longer enemies, but the two heartbeats of one soul. I didn't have to choose sides. I didn't have to fight anything. I only had to breathe with it. And in that breath, I realized I was no longer an empath, no longer a wounded healer, no longer any label. I was simply a human being, living, feeling, existing. And in that simplicity, my soul was finally free. I thought of all the people who had walked through my journey, those who hurt me, those I tried to save, those who saw my light and then left. I no longer blamed anyone. I simply whispered, "Thank you." Because they were the fire, the wind, the water, the earth, the elements that shaped me into who I've become. I know the journey isn't over. There is no real end to returning to oneself. But now, I'm no longer afraid. I can stand in the storm and still feel peace. I can love without disappearing. I can be silent without hiding. And maybe this is what every empath needs to hear. You were not born to carry the pain of the world. You were born to remind the world that love still exists. Let your light be that reminder. Don't run. Don't save. Don't strain. Just be like a lighthouse in the night, like breath in the chaos, like a flower blooming after the storm. Because in the end, the aura of an empath is not rare because they've never broken. It's rare because they've shattered into 1,000 pieces, and each one, through courage and love, has come back together as light. And when you can stand there, after everything, and still love, still feel, still see beauty in the wreckage, that is the miracle. Not a divine miracle. A human one. Your light has walked through the night. Now it doesn't shine because it's perfect, but because it's real, and the world, more than ever, needs that kind of light. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this story. If this message touched your heart, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you'll never miss the next journey we take together. Your support means the world to me.